Brazil. Go ahead, please. Brazil.
Bueno.
Bueno.
Hello?
Sí, mi pregunta es la siguiente.
My question is the following.
¿Cuál es tu opinión sobre
This is from Bolivia. What is your opinion regarding the high rate of problems that have been reported amongst the joint ventures between countries in developing countries and developed countries, and that have been attributed to cultural differences, specifically in their management styles, in their decision-making processes and resolution of problems areas?
If I comment on that, yes, we've seen many problems, and if I might reference our own border here, the United States with Mexico and the maquiladora industry, many U.S. joint venture partners in doing shelter operations, perhaps in the Mexican border towns, have found that their problems were often cases focused on their failure to find supervisory positions among local people where, for example, we would bring in an American resident who perhaps spoke Spanish, but he didn't have a lot of cultural affinity to the area. He didn't understand the business practices and how things are done in Mexico, for instance, and perhaps had a number of assumptions that were basically U.S.-based assumptions. And many of those early trials among the maquiladora companies have resulted in failure as a result of that. And I think if you look at companies today, and I dare say many of the customers of ours, of Union Bank, we find that there's been a maturity now where companies are very sensitive to the business issues. It just makes business sense, Frank, to have a Mexican national who has the affinity, who perhaps has grown up on both sides of the border, who perhaps can translate the wishes and desires of the American company in a way that is considerate of the Mexican sensitivities, of Mexican business practices, and can be effective in working with the locals. He, in fact, is a local, and I think that's the message I'm trying to leave.
That's clearly very, very important.
Five-second answer.
Okay.
Your companies on both sides must be more than bilingual. They must be bicultural.
Excellent point.
And that is one of the advantages of joint venture. If you have a company that's a local company that participates in management and has personnel and the capacity to handle the management in the country, you're way ahead of the game.
Exactly.
You can get beyond those cultural insensitivities and the lack of knowledge of the business practices and the culture.
All right. We have now a call from Oaxaca. Go ahead, please. Buenos días.
Bueno? Good morning. My question is the following. How can you get low-cost work when? How can you get low-cost work and at a low and to produce good goods, good quality products at a low cost?
We're talking, I think, about a
labor force,
a low-cost labor force, but the aspect of quality production with a labor force that is very modestly paid, and as we know in maquiladoras, for example, there's a very high rate of turnover, and from a business point of view, this is not very good. So, Pat, I think maybe you could take a...
I'd be happy to, Frank. And then others join in, please, because I'm sure I can't cover this entire question just with my own answer, but I will attempt to do the best job that I can. This is a management issue. I think we're finding that, and related to my last comment, that and our understanding, of course, is clearly driven between the relationships between Mexico and the United States and our business. But we have found that management can succeed in this if it does proper training, if it also begins to establish a feeling of family within that company. It is a very well-known problem within the maquiladora industry that there is a great deal of turnover, and for a relatively small amount of money, many locals will leave and cross the street into another shelter operation, another maquiladora. But where companies have been more successful is purely the treatment of its people, the facilities that it provides. Maybe it may be busing, it may be daycare, it may also include subsidized lunches, it may include baseball teams, it may include a lot of you might think of ancillary supports, but it creates a feeling of belonging to that company, which is very important. So that, as the caller said, that low-wage producer can begin to feel part of that company and can continue to be upgraded in their skill sets.
Exactly.
Where they will increase their earning power within that company and feel a part of it.
And I think that training aspect is a very important part of feeling as a part of the organization in any country, not only in...
I think management has to be realistic in what it expects to pay its labor force. As the employees' skills increase, their value increases, and if there's competition for that skill, that labor in the area, the employee is going to naturally look out for his own interests and his family's interests. If he can go across the street and make more money for the same skills, and his current employer is not willing to pay, that's no different than the situation anywhere in the world.
Exactly.
If somebody makes me a better offer, I'm going to move.
Yes.
And if my skills improve as a result of the training my employer provides me, that's wonderful for me. But the employer has to recognize I'm more valuable as a result of it.
Exactly.
And I need to be compensated.
Exactly, and that's true all over the world.
That's right.
Okay, we have a call now from Unam in Cuautitlan. Go ahead, please.
Shyness of Latin American enterprises has something to do with their lack of capability to cover the volumes of products that big markets such as the developed countries actually demand. So how can we resolve on a short term the need to finance and get funds to also augment, to increase the production scale and to make more, produce more goods?
That's a very, very good and very difficult question, and so I'm going to ask Stan to try to answer that.
Well, I'll try to answer part of the question that was at the beginning of the question. It is not advisable to enter into a marketplace to try to serve all of the products from within your own industry that are being consumed in that market. That is why we talk of segmented industries. For example, Taiwan in the footwear industry moved into a segment of the market that dealt with lower cost or more affordable footwear, where Italy today, on the other side of the spectrum, has chosen a part of the footwear industry that has to do with high fashion. So you don't try to serve the entire needs of a particular industry with a wide array of products.
So it's a focus.
It's a focus, exactly.
Right. And go ahead, Pat.
That's a good point. To elaborate on that, if we look at the Korean example, they've done the same thing in automobiles, for example. They don't attempt at the moment to compete head-to-head with the Japanese. They are able to produce a lower price point in the production of their automobiles. And one might argue the Japanese quality control might be superior, but the price is considerably higher. The Koreans have had great success in the sales of their vehicles upon entry into the United States, and first in Canada.
There's also, I think, a related aspect to this question, if I might say, and that's about once one is in a market segment and let's say that wonderful success happens and it explodes, and then you have to backfill your infrastructure to be able to keep up with the market segment that you work so hard to get into. What do you see as the issues in terms of keeping up with a successful business venture?
I think she's talking about financing to build the facilities you need to provide the volume to fill the need or the market that you've developed.
Capacitation.
Yeah, Pat is a finance expert here.
you literally have to have low-cost financing, otherwise it doesn't work.
Okay.
And generally, low-cost financing is provided by the government in country, if not in all cases. And certainly in the case of Mexico, that is not true today, unfortunately. If we look at the successful patterns that the Japanese have shown us through MITI and other developed countries, they were able to succeed by that low-cost financing that George made reference to.
Okay.
There is financing available, however, outside of country. For example, there is financing available in the United States for Mexican projects, and that's something that maybe we can touch on at a later date and get in more detail.
Okay, we'll come back to these sorts of issues, but now let us continue with Module 2, where Mr. Gonzalez will talk about the current realities of free trade in the United States and Latin America.
In past programs, I've presented several topics, including international joint venture agreements and related legal considerations, dispute resolution mechanisms, and two multilateral trade agreements, the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, and the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT. I also discussed ways to identify, select, and use professional support services in countries other than your own. When I was planning the materials for today's program, I had several discussions with colleagues and clients. My question to all of them was, what are businesses trying to accomplish by expanding operations beyond their own borders? Why enter into joint ventures? Why should nations enter into trade agreements with one another? They all agreed the simple answer to all these questions is that today's global economic environment requires companies to reach markets larger than those in their own countries. Sellers of goods and services need to generate enough revenue to create a profit. Buyers want access to a greater variety of goods and services at more competitive prices. Both goals are achieved by expansion of business operations beyond borders, multinational joint ventures, and trade agreements. To address these questions, I'll talk today about some of the bilateral and multilateral trade agreements beyond NAFTA and the GATT that are being negotiated or have been signed among the various countries throughout Latin America. After covering those trade agreements, I'll talk with you about the importance of the sales agreement in international transactions. As of today, there are approximately 29 bilateral and multilateral trade agreements that have been signed among the various countries in Latin America. There are 6 that I am aware of that are in the process of negotiation. The 2 common themes in all of these trade agreements are, 1, the ending of tariff and non-tariff trade barriers, and 2, reciprocal treatment by the other parties to the agreements. I can't present to you all of the details of each of these agreements because it would take too much time in this program, so I will only refer to a few that I have selected for illustrative purposes. The appendix in your participant manual includes a capsule discussion of several that I don't mention here. CARICOM. The Caribbean community is comprised of Antigua and Barbuda, Bahamas, Barbados, Belize, Dominica, Grenada, Guyana, Jamaica, Montserrat, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago. On January 1st, 1995, CARICOM entered into a trade agreement with Colombia, ending various tariffs over a 3-year period. The Central American Common Market that was originally established collapsed in 1960. Panama, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, and El Salvador signed an agreement to establish SICA on February 1st, 1993. SICA came into effect on April 1993 without Panama and its members have signed agreements concerning unfair trade practices, rules of origin, and reduction of tariffs for intra-regional trade for 5 to 20% for about 5,000 products. The member countries also plan to establish a unified customs code. Costa Rica, Panama, and Belize are eventually expected to join the free trade zone. A Mexico-Central American free trade zone is expected to be established in 1996. In February 1993, CICA countries, except Panama, signed the Declaration of Caracas with the G3 countries to remove trade barriers. While not a member of the Common Market, Panama has a bilateral trade treaty with each member country. Chile and Argentina have signed a multilateral tariff-cutting agreement. Bolivia and Paraguay. Bolivia and Paraguay signed a limited free trade agreement in March 1994, which covers about 200 products, 130 of which are to become completely tariff-free. Duties on the remaining products also are to be reduced, many by 50% or more. Chile and Bolivia. Chile and Bolivia signed a partial free trade accord in March 1993, which reduced or eliminated tariffs on a selected group of 100 agricultural and industrial products. Chile and Colombia. Chile and Colombia reached an agreement to free bilateral trade over a 5-year period. On January 1st, 1994, tariffs were to be removed on 40% of products currently traded. Most of the remaining items are to be made duty-free in 1997 and the rest by 1999. A number of products are exempt from the accord, including exports of Colombian oil, coal and textiles to Chile, as well as shipments of Chilean copper to Colombia. In October 1993, Colombia, Mexico, Venezuela, and 14 Caribbean basin nations formed a new group to strengthen their ties and increase trade, investment, and cooperation. The new organization, called the Association of Caribbean States, officially came into existence in 1994, and its first summit was held August 17th and 18th, 1995. Colombia, Venezuela, and Ecuador have broadened their earlier trade agreement, pursuant to which any product can be sold, whatever its origin. The only tariff barrier is a common external tariff ranging between 5 and 20%. Costa Rica and Mexico signed a bilateral free trade agreement on April 5, 1994, which is considered to be the most comprehensive bilateral Latin American free trade agreement to date. The agreement went into effect January 1, 1995. Ecuador and the United States. Ecuador has become the first Andean-packed nation to sign a bilateral treaty on intellectual property rights with the U.S. The treaty, signed November 1993, followed a bilateral investment agreement signed August 1993 and will help Ecuador attract U.S. investment and technology. Under the treaty, Ecuador promises to honor internationally accepted patent and copyright laws. The Mercosur, or Southern Common Market Treaty, was signed in March 1990. The member countries are Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. The principal objectives of the treaty are to integrate the members' markets and make optimum use of available resources to preserve the environment, to improve physical skills, to coordinate macroeconomic policies, to encourage complementarity between different sectors of the economy based on principles of gradualism, flexibility, and balance, to promote the scientific and technological development of the members, and to modernize their economies in order to supply and improve the quality of available goods and services with a view to enhancing the living conditions of their populations. As a basis for integration, the treaty identifies a need for coordination of microeconomic and sectorial policies between members in areas of foreign trade, agriculture, industry, fiscal and monetary matters, foreign exchange and capital, services, customs, transport, and communications. The treaty also provides for harmonization of legislation in the relevant areas of the members. The common market is to provide free movement of goods, services, and factors of production between countries to eliminate tariff and non-tariff barriers. It is to be based on reciprocity of rights and obligations between the parties. Imports of products whose prices are influenced by subsidies or other unfair practices will be prohibited. A common external tariff system is to be implemented. On December 15, 1995, Mercosur and the European Union signed an unprecedented cooperation agreement establishing the framework for a future free trade area. Mercosur and the United States. Mercosur and the United States executed an agreement on June 19, 1991 in an attempt to enhance friendship and a spirit of cooperation and to develop further trade and investment. Mercosur and Bolivia. Mercosur and Bolivia entered into a free trade accord in effect on January 1, 1995. The Group of Three, or G3, includes Mexico, Colombia, and Venezuela, who entered into an agreement for internal free trade. The agreement, which eliminates tariffs among the three nations over 10 years at a rate of 10%, was promulgated December 31, 1994, and expands access to the domestic markets of the three countries with specific provisions for automotive and agricultural sectors. The Andean community now consists of Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, Venezuela, and Peru. It replaces the now defunct Andean Pact trade bloc, making the 27-year-old regional group a political alliance on par with its European Union counterpart. Members seek internal free trade with a full common market. Andean Pact nations adopted common external tariffs on February 1995. Peru's membership was suspended in August 1990 due to disagreements over the group's external tariffs. Agreements are currently in negotiation between Chile and Brazil, Chile and the United States, Colombia and Venezuela, with several Central American countries, and Mexico and Bolivia. Negotiations for SAFTA, or the South American Free Trade Agreement, have commenced, with 1995 to be the starting point of the plan's 10-year abolishment of most tariffs. In April 1994, the Brazilian Foreign Minister, Celso Amorim, announced that SAFTA will follow the example of NAFTA with the goal of abolishing tariffs on 80% of South America's regional trade over 10 years. The Free Trade Area of the Americas, FTAA, is a multinational effort to form a free trade area of the Americas by 2005. We should not forget the importance of the North American Free Trade Agreement known as NAFTA, which went into effect on January 1, 1994, linking Canada, the United States, and Mexico, and the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, the multinational covenant that circumscribes the conduct of international trade policy, which has resulted in the creation of the World Trade Organization. It's evident that the evolving process of lowering borders and eliminating trade barriers are no longer events for the future, but are a present reality. Opportunities for the access to foreign buyers of goods and services in the Western Hemisphere are greater today than at any other time in history. If businesses expect to compete in the New World marketplace, business people must know and understand the advantages now available to them that has resulted through cooperation among nations. There is much to learn as trading relationships among the countries of the world continue to evolve. As I asked earlier, what is the point of all this? I'm sure all of you will agree that the point is to complete a successful international sales transaction of goods and services and thereby increase profitability. The key ingredients to a successful international sales transaction are competitiveness and profitability. Competitiveness means the ability to attain a desired result in a competitive situation, as in the ability of a business to offer products or services that will attract international customers and to negotiate profitable contracts with those customers. To be competitive, sellers of goods and services must offer products that are of a higher quality than their competition at a price that reflects value. In order to reflect value, sellers of goods and services selling products into foreign countries must adjust their prices to market conditions in the country in which they want to sell. In some cases, especially where a government subsidizes the cost of a commodity purchased from domestic sellers, it may not be possible for a foreign seller to sell the same commodities at prices that are competitive. One example of this that I can give you is the sale of electrical energy produced by electrical wind power generating facilities. At one time, electrical power generated by these facilities in the U.S. had to be purchased by U.S. public utilities for 6 cents per kilowatt hour. Developers of these types of products have tried to negotiate contracts for the sale of electricity in Mexico to industrial users whose electrical energy consumption is subsidized by the government and is sold at 2 cents per kilowatt hour and therefore cannot compete for this business in Mexico. Profitability means yielding or bringing profit or gain. Profit is lucrative and useful. A good synonym is beneficial. In general terms, profit means money that is left from a transaction for the sale of goods after deducting all of the costs of producing and marketing them. If it costs more to produce and market the goods than that for which they can be sold, then there is no profit. If no profit can be made from a transaction, then there must be other types of incentives. Otherwise, there'll be no reason to go forward with a transaction. Risk management is also a term that should be part of every businessman's vocabulary. Contract risks can be small, moderate, or unlimited. Risk containment is one of the main objectives of the drafting of an international sales agreement. Risk containment is important because losses a business can suffer as a result of unmanaged risk can result in the loss of profit. Risk can only be contained if it can be identified and quantified. Once that has been done, the business can evaluate whether the risk is acceptable, and it can use tools such as insurance or a bond to contain and protect against it. The basic rules for the preparation and negotiation of good international sales contracts are: 1. Understand what your customer expects. Recognize that his rules, laws, and regulations are apt to be different than yours. Explore your options. 2. Know what your risks are. Manage against them. Know what your contract opportunities are. Take advantage of them. 3. International contracts should be written with complete, definitive work scope and payment provisions, clear, comprehensive, non-conflicting, reasonable terms and conditions, and appropriate allocation of obligation and risks between the parties. The care and attention you give to the analysis and preparation of contract proposals, the judgment you exercise in determining which terms and conditions to accept, and the way in which you manage these terms and conditions can have a direct bearing on the profitability of your international sales transaction. The main objective of an international sales transaction is to sell goods and or services and to be paid for them. One mechanism used to ensure payment is a letter of credit, which my friend and colleague, Mr. Pat Rossi, will tell you about. Thank you for your interest and attention.
Let us continue now with Module 3, in which Mr. Rossi will discuss some of the basic financial mechanisms for international investment and trade.